So evening, everyone, and thanks so much for coming, especially since apparently parking was a little bit of a challenge, but you all made your way in, and thank you for that. I'm really excited that you're here. If this is the first time you've attended one of our book clubs, we have been up and running since 2011 when one of our docents, Jane Roubaix, she's no longer with us, very sad to say, had the brilliant idea that we should read the books that Charles Birchfield read. And so that's how the book club began. But we very quickly pivoted to reading books written by the authors from the region, which is very much in keeping with our mission here at the Birchfield Penny Arts Center to support and celebrate the creative talents of those in our region. So we have, since 2011, hosted over 100 authors. And while I thought I had read every type of book there was, we had not, because this was a very different book. Laura Evans' book, Silent Season, Chasing Sustainability Through the Law, is a book like no other. Laura marries college life, teaching, the law, the environment, nonprofits, with personal stories and a big patchwork, helping us understand her lived experience and the realities and status of environmental law in this country. Laura, a Cornell graduate, earned a doctor's degree from the prestigious University of Texas at Austin School of Law. She's an experienced environmental planner. She is skilled in environmental law and policy, land use regulations, administrative law, legal research, podcast productions, grant writing and editing, and a gardener. In addition to being a published author, Laura is the creator and host of the Keeping Things Alive podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. So Laura, thank you for coming tonight and welcome.
Yeah, thank you. It feels really good to be here, and yeah, I appreciate your introduction. I've been waiting for this for over a year, and so I'm grateful to be here. So thank you. I guess I'm gonna start off with a short, like 20-ish minute presentation that I created, and then part of that is reading a short excerpt, and then we'll open it up for questions from Mary and anyone of you is also online. So yeah, we can start. Yeah, next slide. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the reasons why I wrote Silent Seasons. I think there's a number of reasons. I kind of narrow in on 3. And then I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the book structure because that was really important. It is a different kind of book where I'm really trying to teach the reader about environmental law, but do it in an engaging way that weaves in my story so that they can understand it better, because environmental law is pretty, it's broad, it's a little boring, it's hard to see it day to day. So I really try to bring it to a personal level. And then lastly, we'll see how much time we have, but the whole purpose of the book is to really talk about sustainability. I created my own definition for that, which we'll get to. And that is really what ties the whole book together is, how can we take care of the earth and each other now and for future generations? Okay, so why I wrote this book? It's because I've always loved the earth. I've been familiar with Charles Birchfield for a while because my aunt really loves him. And so I know that he paints a lot of landscapes, a lot about nature. And so I was searching for some quotes from him to get ready for this talk. And I found this one that I really loved. As an artist grows older, he has to fight disillusionment and learn to establish the same relation to nature as an adult as he had when a child, disillusionment has been an issue for me, but I have always loved the earth from when I was little. That's me. I was probably about 3 years old hugging a tree, and it really hasn't stopped. So that is the real purpose, is to really reflect like that and that sort of relationship. So, yeah. Also, I wanted to reinvigorate Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. She published Silent Spring in 1962 and passed away of breast cancer just a few years after that. So she never really got the chance to see where her book went. But her her book, it was, she wasn't the only one. There's many other people that were a part of the environmental movement then and ramping up to it, but that really got people talking, like a lot of housewives were having conversations about the environment and especially like chemical degradation and pollution. And I think this quote here, which you can all read on the screen about, I'll just read the last sentence. The threat is, it's an era dominated by industry in which the right to make $1 at whatever cost is seldom challenged. I've really found that to be a huge issue with environmental law and policy and all the jobs that I've been doing. It usually ends up where if I'm making money, I'm generally harming the environment. So yeah, this quote continues, and the title, Silent Seasons, it's about me being silent about my jobs and experiences, but then also kind of a nod to Silent Spring. All right, the last reason is that I really wanted to teach people about sustainability and environmental law through my story. And I think storytelling is one of the most powerful ways to bring people together and understand something. So I've been pretty obsessed with climate change and really environmental degradation overall. I think climate change is a part of it, but that's like one framing. It's really everything that we do to the earth as a result of mostly industrialization. So in 2014, when this book came out, it really helped me understand that at least from a Western psychology perspective, we really are not wired to take action about climate change because we're sitting here, we're not in immediate danger. It's around us, but like it's hard to see. And so finding new ways to get the message to our brains that we need to take action. And so George Marshall, he really talks about how finding new messengers rather than finding new messages. And I took that to heart. And I decided that I've just had so many experiences in my different jobs that I really wanted to bring them out and put them all together in a book. Another book that I wish I'd put the cover on is called Cassandra Speaks, and the author is escaping me right now, but I loved that book. It really talked about also how women just don't have as many of their stories told out in the world. And so I was also inspired by that to really, share my story while teaching and inspiring people about environmental law. Okay, so I'm going to spend the most time here. There's like 2 slides. I really wanted to talk about the book structure today because that was really important to me. And this also really explains me and my different experiences and the journey that I've taken. And that allows me to also, explain environmental law to the reader in a way that's more understandable and that you can, actually see in your own life. So chapter 1, it is about childhood. I wasn't thinking about the law then, but I was a very big swimmer. And so I think that in that chapter, it's swimming tips. It seems kind of strange, but I learned a way to swim through this book called Total Immersion that really talked about efficiency in the water and working with the water so that you could go faster and just be a more sustainable swimmer. So I talk about that and how there were so many lessons as a kid about swimming easily in the water that I can apply to working with nature instead of against it. Chapter 2 in college, I did take some environmental law courses, and that is what got me to Washington, D.C. for like a January intensive where we studied natural resources policy in D.C. And my project was on something called the GAS Act. I think it was Gasoline for America's Security Act. It never was passed, but it was proposed by a senator from Texas who was using the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina to pass laws that would basically make it easier for oil refineries to be built and operate. And so I interviewed a lot of different people. It was really fun to get to talk to all these different people about what that law was. Some people were for it, some people were against it. And I learned a lot there about just honestly, like the combativeness of environmental law. So then we get to chapter 3. It has nothing to do with me. It's just environmental law 101. And that's where I really set the stage for how environmental law is set up. There's different parts of it. There's obviously like the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, all those, but they were passed in the 70s and 80s. Before that, there was more property law. And I just try to give a broad overview of what it's like. And I use the Genesee River as an example, just to really illustrate how, different environmental laws work. Now, once we get past that, this is when I start getting into my different environmental laws or jobs that I've had. And that is part of my, disillusionment and frustration, is that my jobs were never really helping the environment. So when I started in law school, that's where I did a lot of work on the Clean Air Act at the Environmental Law Clinic. And so that's where I start talking about that law. One other thing I'll say with these chapters moving forward is that there's a summary of each of these laws in the beginning of the chapter, and then it goes more into my story. So this book is also set up where you could read all the law summaries and never learn anything about me, plus the chapter 3, or you could skip all of those environmental law summaries and just learn about me. So it's kind of like a choose your own adventure, or you can do all of it.
I like to
kind of up to you. Like the weaving? Thank you. Okay, so next we move on to chapter 5, and right out of law school, I did get a job at a law firm. I practiced federal wildlife law, and it was really focused on the Endangered Species Act. I will be reading an excerpt from that experience, but that really was where I learned a lot about how a lot of environmental laws are land use laws, what goes where and how do we build it? What do we do with the waste? If you dig out, Rich Stadium right now, what do we do with all of the dirt? What do we do with the waste? How is it going to impact people while it's being built into the future, as well as the animals around it? So next slide. After that, I did the law firm and law school. I was in Austin, Texas, and here at the government agency, I'm still in Austin, Texas. I'm at the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. I talk about the public trust doctrine in that chapter because that law has been on the books it was kind of started in Roman law, and it's been a part of property law, but it really has to do with the government being stewards of natural resources for citizens that currently live and then in the future. And so this particular doctrine has been woven into some property law, some case law, but it's followed a lot in water law, but it could be expanded so much more to be really protective of the environment. So there's a really good book called Nature's Trust that kind of lays all that out. And so I talk about that there. Then we move on to chapter 7. I moved back to Western New York in 2015, and I started working for a consulting company doing the National Environmental Policy Act. It's called NEPA. So I was a NEPA specialist, and we would write environmental impact statements and environmental assessments for federal projects to kind of figure out what's going on with a project and what impact it would have on the environment. That's where I started getting into not necessarily just natural resources, but also the human environment, because NEPA does talk about the characteristics of neighborhoods, the people that live there. It's a very expansive view of the environment. And I learned a lot there. I did a lot of remote work pre-pandemic, which was really interesting and good. But I also still at that point felt like I wasn't doing enough to really help with the environment. And so that is when I got foot surgery. I talk about that in the book, and it really being, bedridden for a long time and just frustrated. I decided to leave the consulting company and join a nonprofit organization. So that's where I started doing a lot more grant writing. I also did a lot of advocacy for the New York Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. That law I explain again in the chapter, and there's a lot to say about that one. It really sets a framework for going to zero carbon emissions by 2050, but does not provide the funding. And so there's a lot more that's still unfolding in New York State, and I'm sure you've all seen different parts of it over time. All right, after that, we got the pandemic pause, and that's where I plan to go take the New York bar, and the pandemic canceled those plans. So I was not thinking about the law. I made chicken noodle soup instead, and I wrote up a recipe for chicken noodle soup there. And I actually have some recipe cards for all of you after this is over. But yeah, from a sustainability perspective and being connected to the earth, I think it's really important to be growing as much food as you can and also cooking with your own food. I will say right now, I live in the woods and it's really hard to grow food. So I'm trying to grapple with that. So as much as, it's really whatever you can do, but building that connection, I think is really important. And then lastly, I talk about moving forward, and New York, they passed an environmental rights amendment 2 years ago. And when I wrote the book, it was freshly passed. And now there are some lawsuits that are happening, but it basically says that every New York citizen is guaranteed or should have a clean environment and healthful environment. So there's a lot of work to be done, and it's interesting to see where that will go. But back in chapter 3, just talking about there's different ways environmental law can be passed. It could be a regulation, it could be a law that was passed by a legislature, but you can also change the Constitution itself to even provide broader protections. All right, so this is where I go into a short excerpt of Silent Seasons. This is from the chapter where I'm working at the law firm and doing Endangered Species Act work. So I'm gonna take a sip of water and start. Okay, so one hot Texas day in 2012, I spent 6 work hours searching a large ranch for a tiny songbird with Jack, a trained bird biologist. If we found golden-cheeked warblers living on the property, there would be more ESA, Endangered Species Act, permitting hurdles for our client's new housing development project. As we paced the 100-acre property, sweat poured down my back. I worried that I didn't bring enough water, and I marveled at the strangeness of my first professional job. The golden-cheeked warbler is a small migratory songbird that has impacted land development in Central Texas since it was listed as endangered and protected by the Endangered Species Act in the 1990s. Jack was certified by the service to identify birds by sound and worked for a consulting firm that frequently partnered with my law firm on projects. On the ranch, Jack walked the property, listened for bird calls, identified which species was making the sound, and wrote each name in his notebook. I was there to gain a deeper understanding of the process to help me prepare Endangered Species Act permit documents and negotiate with the Fish and Wildlife Service on golden-cheeked warbler projects in the future. Jack and I spent hours walking the property. He confidently wrote bird species names in his notebook as he heard their calls. He made a psst, psst, psst noise underneath the small tree, and I watched in awe as songbirds flocked around him in response to his sound. He reminded me of a gender-bending Texas version of Snow White. We came across a herd of wild boar with jet black coats that gleamed in the sunshine. Jack lifted rocks to show me scorpions coiled underneath. I was reminded about how different and prickly the plants and animals are in Texas compared to Western New York. At the end of the day, after hours of walking and starting to feel dehydrated, Jack heard a sound I missed, perked up like a hunting dog, and started running through the woods. I chased after him, stopped abruptly when I found him under a tree, looked up, and saw my first golden-cheeked warbler with my very own eyes. So that is the opening to my law firm chapter, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of taste of how the law was showing up in my work life. All right. Okay, so kind of winding towards the end, but here is my definition of sustainability that I wanted to create for myself because, yeah, there are a lot of different definitions out there, but this one is the practice of working with the Earth's systems, physics, people, plants, animals, information, technology, and all other resources to support life on this Earth for current and future generations of people, plants, animals, and the Earth itself. Next slide. These are some themes that I came up through the book. I didn't want to talk about that too much here. I think it's just better explained in the book, but communicating with one another, I think is really important. I do have a tendency to go silent, but really talking about things is important. cooperating and collaborating, those go hand in hand, but really working together, because this is environmental issues impact all of us. And yeah, talking about them, working on them together is important. Anti-competition and accountability kind of came up after I wrote the book. I think the first 3 were more in my introduction, and then the last 2 were in the conclusion, because as I wrote it, I realized I talk a lot about being graded on a curve, or just being in Navy ROTC, just different competition related things that really ended up hurting me. And I see it all the time in our business world and in our culture all over the place, where everyone's competing with one another instead of collaborating. And then accountability is really hard. When someone does something that causes harm, how do we hold them accountable? So I talked about that a lot in the book too. Okay, so throughout the book, another part, which I don't know, this is a bit of a spoiler, but I do weave sustainability lessons throughout the entire book. I think by the end, there's 32 or 33 of them. But here are a few that I just wanted to point out. This kind of comes from the swimming chapter. When working with the earth, it fosters sustainability, while working against her makes things more difficult and unsustainable. Another one I really think is the importance of stopping and really admitting when something isn't working. You can quit and seek out a new path. I found that a lot with my jobs. Also, yeah, just things that I'm doing. If I get really frustrated or I notice it's not working, instead of doubling down on it. I mean, I tried that with the law firm, different jobs. I just kept going, and eventually my body said no. So yeah, quitting and finding a new path, I think, is really important. The last one's a bummer, but definitely something I found. It's the U.S. environmental law system. It's never going to save the earth or us. It's unsustainable at its root. I have a lot of reasons for that. It breaks up the earth in different little parts. You got the air, the water, the animals, when really it's all a system working together. I've really tried to work in it to do good, and it's really just been harmed. So that is an important and difficult lesson that I've learned. This is the last slide of lessons, really talking about how you can read books, you can read reports, but in order to really understand what's going on and what a person is like, what a place is like, you really have to be there. You really have to talk to them. You really have to experience it in real life. I've seen so many environmental plans, just different documents you can read, but unless you're like doing it and being there, it's not going to go anywhere. I talked about this before, but yeah, when I cook with food that I grow, my body is more nourished, I feel better, and I'm more effective at life. And then lastly, I'll just end with, there's really no one answer or silver bullet to fostering sustainability. It's never going to come from one place or one person or one idea. It's got to be a lot of people working together in a lot of different places. And I see it happening. It's not like it doesn't happen. It's just, we have to keep going, and I think hope is important in this area, and just knowing that like one person doesn't have it, there isn't one solution. So, yeah. Yep. And thank you very much. I love being here. I do make a podcast, and that's my website. So yeah, please get in touch with me. I'm really honored to be here and happy to take any questions.